wanted an answer to. And it is a perfectly legitimate answer if you answer the question yes. But you've said otherwise. Isn't it a fact that you immediately or very quickly realized that the same mistake that was made in 2003 and 2004 was probably made for 2001 and 2002, but that the statute of limitations had run and you didn't have to pay the tax for those other 2 years? The auditor said you didn't have to pay anything more than for 2003 and 2004, and you accepted that. And I think 99% of taxpayers would say, well, I'm glad the statute of limitations ran. I didn't have to go back and pay the other 2 years. So I guess my question is, was your state of mind such that it didn't even occur to you that that you were taking advantage of the statute of limitations by not going back to 2001 and 2002 obligations, which were identical to the 2003 and 2004 obligations?
Senator, as you said, an IRS audit is an extremely serious thing. I took it very seriously. I looked very carefully at what they said I owed. I paid what they said I owed. And as I said to you many times, when I think back on it now, I should have asked a lot more questions. I should have taken more care in considering it settled at the time. But when the IRS conducts an audit and they tell you that this settles your obligations, I paid what they said I owed.
Sure, and any taxpayer would. But my question to you is a little different from that, and that is whether you thought at the time or at any time thereafter, you know, I didn't do anything different those first 2 years. I probably would have owed that too, except that the statute of limitations is run, so I don't have to pay that. Did that thought never cross your mind until you became a candidate for nomination as Secretary of the Treasury?
Senator, as I said, the IRS told me what my obligations were. I met those obligations, and I did not think about it again until, as going through the vetting process, and I disclosed all this material to those committees, they came and asked me a bunch more questions about that. And it was in that context that I decided that it was appropriate me at that point to go back and correct for that early error. And as I said to you before, I regret having not done that sooner. I believe I should have done it sooner, and if I thought about it more, maybe I would have come to that judgment sooner.
But but you're saying that's the first time that it occurred to you that you also could have a liability for 2001 and 2002.
That was the first time I thought through carefully the question about whether I should go back and cover that. But again, I should have thought it more carefully before, and if I think about it today, I would have handled that differently.
If there's anything that you'd like to supplement the record with respect to our exchange just now, I'd appreciate if you would do that as well when you provide these written answers, including if you can determine whether there was anything in writing between you and your accountant or anything else that would bear on the question of whether, in fact, you relied upon the statute of limitations rather than just having failed to think about it. And again, I'll say, it's legal to rely on the statute of limitations. There's nothing wrong with relying on the statute of limitations. I think what some people find implausible is that that isn't what you're saying you did. What you're saying is that you didn't think about it until it was brought to your attention in connection with your nomination. Is that correct?
I said, Senator, that I did not, looking back on it, did not think about it carefully enough and did not ask enough questions, and I regret not having done that.
But that's different from the question I just answered. You are not now then saying that it didn't occur to you prior to your nomination that you might also have an obligation for 2001 and 2002, which is barred by the statute of limitations. Is that correct?
Senator, of course I was aware of the fact that I began work at the IMF in 2001 and 2002. But again, I did what I thought was the right thing to do at the time, which is the IRS told me what I owed.
Yeah, I'm sorry to take extra time here, but would you answer my question rather than dancing around it, please? The question is whether it occurred to you before you were nominated, or before you were approached to be nominated, that in point of fact, you didn't have to go beyond 2003 and 4 because of the statute of limitations.
Senator, I did not believe when I settled that audit and paid what they owed me that I had obligations to go back. I did not think about that until I was going through the vetting process and had disclosed at that point to the transition members reviewing my tax records the entire circumstances surrounding that episode. I had not thought about it in intervening years, no occasion to think about it, and I might not have thought about it unless I'd gone through that process. But having thought about it then, I did what I thought was right, which was to go back and correct for that error.
Okay, that's a relatively clear answer, the answer being no, you didn't think about it until it became important in connection with your nomination.
Well, what I said was that I didn't think about it until, having gone through that process and disclosed all this to the transition team, I was forced to go back and go through it again and think about it. And having done that, I did what I thought was appropriate then.
Yeah, and that's the first time it occurred to you that it may be that you avoided the liability because of the statute of limitations.
I did not believe, Senator, that I was avoiding my liability. Senator, I have worked in public service all my life. My first job in government was as an employee of the Treasury. I grew up in government with a deep appreciation of the obligations that come with that. I would never put myself in the position where I was intentionally not meeting my obligations as an American taxpayer. In this case, I made a series of mistakes, but they were not intentional mistakes. They're my responsibility. I take those things extremely seriously. And again, I regret those mistakes, but they were not intentional. I've corrected them, but they're my responsibility.
Okay. Rather than me asking for any additional testimony, review carefully what you said. And if you think it needs to be modified in any, because you're under oath there, if it needs to be modified in any way, please provide that for the record.
Okay, thank you, Senator. I have a couple of questions that, from Senator Grassley, which I'd like you to look at, and you can respond in writing. As is our usual practice, senators will have written questions for you and submit those to you. And I ask that all senators submit those questions by 5 o'clock this evening. And I urge you, Mr. Geithner, to respond to those questions before our markup of your nomination tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Hearing's adjourned.
We've been listening to a hearing in front of the Senate Finance Committee. They were questioning Tim Geithner. He's the president's nominee for Treasury Secretary. A lot of questions about policy, about the TARP, about the stimulus plan, but a lot of questioning, including some tough questioning there from Senator Kyle about his tax obligations.